Our informatics partner is the Gran Sasso Science Institute in L'Aquila. This panel nearly involves the entire research staff of the two universities. Now I leave the floor to Matteo Leonardi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco. The Laudare project aims to shed new light on a musical literary genre that has long been neglected by scholars because it was considered popular and impure due to its propensity to contaminate forms and codes in order to fulfill the expectation of a less refined audience. The original sin of the Lauda had been recognized in what is now called transcoding, i.e. the contamination of one code with another, in its use of Contrafactio as its fundamental constructing mechanism. Lauda not only despises secular melodies in sacred texts, but also resemanticizes other grammars, for example, the topology of secular lyric poetry. It is precisely because of these features that today we look at Lauda as a rare and precious artistic document, which allows us to enter into the dynamics of mass cultural production, where pure codes are intertwined due to mutually come to life in ritual gesture and music, and with music they are orally disseminated and recreated. Reconstructing the process of creation and use of Lauda text allows us to enter the medieval mindset and to glimpse the historical backgrounds that made them possible. It is an immersion in a past which, among other things, surprises us in its extraordinary relevance in a multimedia and transcoding world like today's. The database under construction within the project intends to put into dialogue, first and foremost, the literary and musical texts that constitute the Lauda, giving the utmost attention to both elements. The whole repertoire of Lauda set to music will therefore be included in the context of a broader database of all Lauda sources, even those without any musical setting. The first phase of the research has already included a systematic inventory of all the manuscript sources of Lauda to define the wide margins of the tradition. The result is a summary of previous knowledge, originally pulverized over a myriad of reports and studies scattered over a century and sometimes neglected, also integrated with the new archival findings. For each source, we have created a record which, after specifying whether it is a manuscript or printed source, in the period between 1470 and 1563, the main printed editions are also considered. As the rhizome siglum, or a newly created one for printed works, the place of conservation with the appropriate call number, the most precise dating possible, the monographic or miscellaneous nature of the collection, the presence of musical settings notated or implied by the rubric cante siccome, meaning to be sung on the tune of, the copyist and the patron, when known, the geographical provenance, the primary and secondary bibliography, the partial or complete editions of the specific source and the studies mainly dedicated to it, and the incipits if available. In some cases, additional information will be added. For example, the unavailability of the manuscript when lost, or the passage from one owner to another. The intent is to constitute a general incipit repertoire of Lauda, as complete as possible, indicating for each text, in addition to the incipit in semi-diplomatic transcription, the position within the codex, the form, ballad, serventese, octaves, etc., with the relative number of verses and any specific bibliography. The first results appear encouraging from both a quantitative and qualitative point of view. The most authoritative repertoire of the past of manuscript sources of Lauda was the one composed by Annibale Tenneroni in 1909, with the title Inizi di antiche poesie italiane, religiose e morali, con prospetto dei codici che le contengono e introduzione alle laudi spirituali, included around 200 sources, to which some additions were made by Frati dating back to 1917-1919. The new repertoire under construction is much broader, surpassing the past ones of over 1,000 sources. The repertoire sheds light on some interesting phenomena, such as the widespread dissemination of manuscripts outside of Italy, sometimes after dismemberment, sometimes as intact codices, even in regions that seem to be peripheral to our peninsula, such as Poland, Denmark, or South Africa, or the important role of private collections also driven by the antique market. If the great archival and library centers from the Central Library of Florence to the Vatican Apostolic Library in Rome, from the Bolognese libraries of the Archiginnasio and Universitaria to the Riccardiana of Florence and the central libraries of Rome and Naples retain their relevance, one can also see the diffusion of sources in small and sometimes very small centers, from Poppi to Savignano di Romagna, from Pieve di Cadore to San Daniele del Friuli. The relatively modest quantity of sources from the region of the Marches in the center-est of Italy compared to Umbria and Tuscany suggests the opportunity for further in-depth analysis and research, despite the leading role played by those territories since the codification of the genre. It was in this region in which the rise of the casino seats of early Lauda was welded, to use the definition of Ignazio Baldelli, with the Franciscan culture of Umbrian origin. And later, in the season of the diffusion of dramatic and Franciscan Lauda, nourished by the ferments of the rigorism of observant spirituality. We can appreciate the slow but clear establishment over the centuries of robust fields of laudistic tradition, from the Cortonese line to the Jacoponic and para-Jacoponic ones, from the Gesuate and Bianco tradition to the Giustinianea and Belcariana ones, up to the season of Savonarola's Lauda and Venetian, which was a prelude to the revolution of printed editions. The overall vision of the Lauda production that these sources provide confirms the primary role played by the 15th century, when many of the anthologies that have come down to us were created, reiterating the importance of popular devotional poetry, but not only, if we remember the contribution of authors such as Lorenzo de' Medici or his mother, Lucrezia Tornabuoni. These lively experiments happened in a time span that includes the decades that Benedetto Croce defined as the century without poetry, considering them to be dull epigons devoid of the creative imagination and artistic inventions which had preceded them. In the south, the panorama is rather sparse, with the notable exception of Naples, where the rich legacy of Lauda from Abruzzo, for example, from L'Aquila, has flowed into the national repertory. There are also cases that suggest a knowledge and appreciation of a Lauda genre national in its breadth, such as the singular Sicilian translations of Jacoponic and Bianchi Laude, handed down from late 15th century Palermo codices, which are accompanied by the vulgarization of liturgical prayers and the creation of new poetry, always in Sicilian language, preserved between Palermo and Catania. The analysis of the data and their transformation into a general synthetic database with a detailed focus on Lauda with music currently underway continues to generate statistical data and suggest interesting interpretative reflections, which we hope will open significantly new perspectives on this extraordinary literary and musical genre. Thank you for your attention. In the next paper, Lucia Marchi talk about how the sources represents contrafactio or not. Thank you.
Each transformation is itself an original. With these words, Davide da Olmi describes the medieval preference for reuse, adaptation, and contrafactio. Since we are at a conference on these topics, I do not need to explain to my audience the implications of such an idea. Rather, I would like to use this statement as a point of departure to reflect on how sources indicate contrafactio or they don't. In other words, does the scribe of a manuscript or the editor of a print want the presence of contrafactio to be recognizable by the reader or not? And what are their tools to reach one goal or the other? Of course, contrafactio could be recognizable by readers, singers, or listeners by various degrees, depending on their level of familiarity with the repertory. Therefore, my reflection today is limited to what appeared to be the intention of the compiler of a certain source and does not take into account the perception of the user. My first case is obscuring contrafactio. And that happens in the oldest monophonic Lauda sources, for example, Cortona, Biblioteca del Comune, manuscript 91, or Florence, Biblioteca Nazionale, Banco Rari, 18. In Cortona 91, two laude share the same melody, and they are Altissima, Luce, and Regina, sovrana. And of those two and their contrafactio, their relationship, will talk Marco Gozzi in a little bit at the end of this session. So the manuscript, Cortona 91, is organized liturgically with an initial section of Marian laude. And these two, Altissima, Luce, and Regina, sovrana, are both Marian laude. So they could have been copied one after the other if the scribe would have wanted to relate them some way, in some way. But that's not the case, because one is at folio 19 and the other one at folio 24 with two other lauda in between. Another case is in Banco Rari 18, where Pastor Principe Beato uses the same melody as Cola Madre del Beato, but again, they are copied far away from each other. One is number 19 and the other is number 41 in the manuscript. We only have one case of a lauda sharing the same melody and copied one after the other. There are Di tutto il nostro core, number 45, and Apostolo Beato, number 46, in Banco Rari 18. But the two pieces have significant variance and only share the melody of the beginning, the ripresa, and then change completely for the rest of the piece, for the mutazione. So I think it's safe to conclude that the scribes of the oldest laudari clearly wanted to maintain the individuality of each lauda. They wanted to obscure contrafactio in a way. And so the early sources present some kind of indivisible or atomic structure. My second case is indicating contrafactio. And that happens in a very common kind of source, the so-called canta siccome sources, which are literary collections of lauda texts only without the music, with rubrics indicating to be sung on the tune of, etc., the canta siccome, etc. You have an example on the right side. This is the manuscript Vaticano Chigiano 266, and the Lauda has a rubric at the beginning, cantasi come ognuno faccia per sé, to be sung to the tune of Ognuno faccia per sé, which is a ballata by Niccolò da Perugia. This kind of source takes full advantage of the contrafactum technique by eliminating the need for musical notation and providing instead an external reference. The music needs to be found in a different source or in the memory of the performer. The cantasi come tradition had been studied by Blake Wilson in his fundamental book, Singing Poetry in Renaissance Florence. And Wilson has identified one of the oldest manuscripts, which is Florence Biblioteca Nazionale, Stroziano 38-130, which was copied before 1406. And one of the largest is the one I just showed you in the previous slide, the Roma Biblioteca Vaticana, Chigi 266, that has 700 Lauda texts and about 300 cantasi come rubrics. One important thing to keep in mind is that the cantasi come links are not always consistent, which means that different sources can indicate different cantasi come, nor they are stable in time, since they can be added or changed at different moments of a life of a source. The result is that we have multiple melodies for a single poetic text and multiple texts associated with a single melody. My third and last case is emphasizing contrafactio by using it as an organizational criteria. And that happens in a late source, the Libro Primo delle Laudi Spirituali, collected by the Dominican friar Serafino Razzi and printed in Venice in 1563. This print is organized around melodies for 1, 2, 3, 4 voices, which are then followed by a number of texts to be sung on the same tune. This is an example of a rubric. You see the melody, the printed melody, and then the rubric says tutte le seguenti si cantano sulla medesima aria, meaning all the following lauda are to be performed on the same tune. The organization of this print shows an intent of maximum economy in terms of music printing, because you only print the melody once. This is not the case for the text, though, since the whole poem, including the verses already printed under the music, is always given. Poems associated with the same musical setting could share textual similarity. For example, riposo non trovo becomes riposo alcun non trova, with clear intertextuality, but in other cases, we do not have any of this. For its late date, Razzi's print represents the mature Renaissance emphasis on collecting and normalizing a repertory which did not aspire in its original conception to any kind of standard. The early laudari displayed a kind of imperfect contrafactio because a melody was continuously modified to adapt it to a different text. Razzi's print instead standardized the phenomenon, making it evident, structural, but almost unnaturally rigid, in a way where we are gaining in organizational clarity in the Razzi print, we're losing in individualization. In the next paper, Giacomo Pirani will connect these three approaches to contrafactio of the original sources to our modern database, showing how reflecting on them can guide our choices for the Laudare project. In a way, we are now shifting from an emic approach, meaning how contemporary cultures perceive the Lauda phenomenon, to an ethic one, how modern scholars and database builders view it. So I'm now leaving the floor to Giacomo Pirani. The title of his paper is From Logical Structure of Lauda Sources to Databases. Thank you very much.
So yes, my title, as she has already said, is From Logical Structure of Lauda Sources to Databases. The three cases just discussed by my colleague Lucia raise, I think, the epistemological issue of how models of Lauda sources, could be of any help in modeling a modern database. The question can also be reversed. Could thinking about these sources in terms of today's collections and organizations of information positively impact our understanding of Lauda performance, tradition, and conception in history? The reason for undertaking this endeavor lies in the fact that the compilers of Lauda sources tackled a problem that parallels our own, notwithstanding the self-evident differences. That is, how to preserve and transmit Lauda efficiently. So let's re-examine Lucia's classification from a different perspective. Case 1 was labeled obscuring contrafactio. In this indivisible or atomic structure of the source, each poetic text corresponds unequivocally to a melody. What is stressed in this model is not the intrinsic similarity of melodies and texts, nor the way they were composed by syntonization or contrafactio, but the liturgical organization of the source. If Lauda sources, as for example, as the Cortonese manuscript 91 or Florence Bancorari 18 had a model, that was the liturgical book, such as the antiphonary. From this foundational and even self-evident observation, we could derive a first logical description of case 1 Lauda sources, that is, a one-to-one relationship between music and text. Even though such a relationship obscures contrafactio, it preserves a great deal of information concerning the way melody and text were mutually applied to each other. In this perspective, the atomic structure is a window open to the actual performance and consumption of Lauda. Case 2 were labeled indicating contrafactio. These sources establish one or more connections between the full transcription of a poetic text, and melodies presumed to be widely known among the public. In such instances, the sources demonstrate a significantly more sophisticated organization and structuring of information compared to case 1. Well, I use these terms more developed with the implicit assumption that standardization and categorization are indicative of a more intellectual or sophisticated approach to understanding Lauda, although this might not necessarily be the case. Nevertheless, in a database, we could view this logical structure as a many-to-many relationship, as there are instances of multiple melodies for a single poetic text and multiple texts associated with a single melody. In this case, since melodies are not provided in the source, they should be represented as an attribute of the verbal text, pointing outside the database to an external source. Case 3 Lauda sources were defined by Lucia as emphasizing contrafactio. Similar to Razzi's edition of 1563, case 3 sources mirror the systematic approach of their compilers. This approach is inherently distinct from the principles governing the content organization in liturgical book et ancient laudari. From the perspective of a database model, case 3 Lauda sources can be depicted as structured in several one-to-many relationships. In each instance presented by the source, a combination of text and melody, essentially a fully notated lauda, is followed by the transcription of only the verbal component of other laude that can be associated with the same melody. One distinctive feature of this model, in contrast to case 1 and case 2 sources, is the central role assigned to music. The source's organization primarily revolves around the melody and its inherent attributes. This includes whether it is ornamented or syllabic in style, the number of voices, which in Razzi's laude are now exclusively polyphonic, and especially the count of syllables that can be matched with it. So, can the models I have just described be valuable for shaping our laudario projects database? Do they help us define, for example, do they help us preserve lauda sources' original logical structure? Or do they help us in defining what constitutes an entry, or to establish an efficient and sustainable workflow? Indeed, I think that by merging some of the historical elements I just outlined, we can build a robust and comprehensive database. From case 1 lauda sources, for example, we can draw the concept of a first atomic structure for the repertoire. Our initial resolution is in fact to define an entry in our database, not as a lauda in its broader sense, encompassing both verbal and musical text transmitted across various sources, and thus subject to the phenomenology of coping and adaptations to specific social or cultural contexts. Instead, we consider an entry, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's fine. Instead, we consider an entry as the individual instance transmitted by a single source. This atomic concept of entries may not initially allow us to group all the laude that we would typically regard as one and the same under a single comprehensive identification. However, it will make our workflow more efficient and secure. Only in a subsequent stage we will combine multiple instances of laude into lauda identities, establishing through philological reasoning the criteria that lauda instances must meet in order to be subsumed. So, in terms of case 2 and case 3 lauda sources, they have already demonstrated to be easy and effective to be transposed into database structures, as Blake Wilson's database attached to the book Singing Poetry in Renaissance Florence proves. Wilson's DB displays some features that cannot be performed by a traditional index on paper, and represents a significant improvement towards a comprehensive database of lauda. It is worth noting that Wilson's DB parallels case 2 lauda sources by connecting poetic text to their melodies and by pointing to external resources to identify the tune. In Wilson's DB, the melody, not provided by the source scrutinized as customary in case 2 lauda sources, can be autonomously retrieved from compilations of 15th century music via David Fallow's catalogue of polyphonic songs, 1450-1480. The Laudario project's database will incorporate many of Wilson's features, while given the possibility of performing new tasks on a wider lauda corpus, as it will take into account the entire lauda tradition and not only the Florentine or the Cantasiccome only. For example, it will provide information about provenance, chronology, geographical distribution of a wide spectrum of sources, from the 12th to the 16th century, in addition to analysis of lauda contents and style in relation to social, cultural, and religious contexts. One of the main intended features of the Laudario project's DB is to offer music transcriptions of laude, which will be searchable by users in order to find compositional patterns and clues related to the historical composition and performance of Lauda. Such comprehensiveness of information based on a transparent entering and processing of data will allow us to consider maybe for the first time, I think, the deep interactions of music and poetic text of Lauda tradition. And at the same time, it will not obscure the peculiarities of each historical instance, nor specific compositional techniques in the Lauda corpus, such as Contrafactio, paving the way, and this is my hope, paving the way for fruitful micro and micro analysis in the repertoire. Thank you very much. And now I think it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague Federico Simonetta, our computer scientist, and we could also say computer magician. So Federico, the floor is yours.
So I'm Federico Simonetta. I'm not a magician. I'm a computer scientist, and here I represent the computer science unit of the Laudare project. And well, Giacomo talked about how we are thinking to construct the database of the Lauda, and I will talk how we plan to extract automatically symbolic information from document images. So the process of extracting symbolic information from images is named historical document understanding. In the image on the right, we can see a visualization of a document understanding method. In the right image, each color represents a different element on the document of the document on the left. So being able to label each different region with a different color means having a representation of symbolic concepts represented in the document. To streamline document understanding, several end-user applications and platforms are available. Some popular options include Transcribus, which is an AI-powered platform developed by the University of Innsbruck and other European research groups, offering capabilities for text recognition, transcription, and for searching of historical documents. Another option is OCR for All, which is an open-source OCR software framework that combines traditional OCR methods with deep learning to handle complex historical scripts and layouts. OCRD is another open-source framework for optical character recognition and document analysis, with a focus on digitizing and transcribing historical documents. And finally, eScriptorium is a web-based platform, like the others, for collaborative transcription and annotation of historical documents. It supports automatic transcription, manual correction, and collaborative annotation. So these tools are developed for end user like musicologists and humanists in general, but they have also a number of limits. They exhibit a cultural bias towards the transcription of text documents from Western cultures. Transcribing documents with non-Latin scripts, complex layouts, or music remains challenging. The main reason for this limitation is the inability to fine-tune these systems to meet very specific requirements. Moreover, in recent years, state-of-the-art transcription systems have made significant advancements in terms of speed and accuracy. One notable system is the FasterDan, developed by Koken and other authors, which performs well on a dataset of German letters handwritten between the 15th and 19th century, achieving a low character error rate between 3 and 370%. It also works well on a dataset of French contemporaneous handwritten letters, where it achieves a character error rate of 450%. Reul et al. Conducted a study on fine-tuning deep learning models on Germanic medieval manuscripts, and they found that after training on a few pages, the average character error rates dropped to a range of 2–5% on 4 unseen manuscripts, And with further training, the character error rate improved to an impressive range of 1% to 2%, but this needed a lot of annotated images. Other authors, Liu et al., proposed an advanced model for Chinese text transcription, setting a new benchmark with 82% of accuracy, which means almost 20% of character error rate. Regarding English, things work better, and right now we are around 2%, 2-3% of character error rate with the most advanced models. The most interesting aspect of these methods is their ability to model both the visual representation of text and the language itself. However, it is important to note that these models, similar to the backbone, in the backbone structure, they're similar to the large language models like ChatGPT, require significant computational resources and access to massive amounts of training data. So regarding our specific project, first, there is a notable absence of a system that combines music transcription and text analysis, making it challenging to comprehend historical documents that contain both elements. Moreover, the lack of end-user interfaces makes it difficult to use this state-of-art tool. Secondly, the existing systems require substantial amount of data for fine-tuning their models, resulting in time-consuming and resource-intensive processes. This issue is exaggerated by the heterogeneous visual characteristics of the manuscript and preinks that we are studying. And lastly, the current end-user systems adopt a monolithic approach to historical document understanding, which limits their ability to adapt to specific research needs. This lack of flexibility prevents us from customizing the tools to suit our specific requirements. The accuracy of current end-user systems is lower compared to the advanced state-of-art models. This is concerning because even the best models struggle to achieve a character error rate of 1%. For instance, considering a character error rate of 3%, this could result in more than 150 incorrect characters from transcribing this speech that I'm talking from a visual source, significantly affecting the statistical analysis of rare words in the corpus that will result. So our proposal addresses this limitation by providing a modular system for building customized artificial datasets. This allows researchers to train and fine-tune models based on their specific requirements, irrespective of data size. Although our main focus is not on end-user tools, we will consider their importance, of course. But it is important to note that recent technologies based on neural transformers are resource-intensive and require computational and user interface development investment. In contrast, our approach involves users encoding small parts of the system through simple scripts. This empowers the users, the humanist, the musicologist, by giving them the ability to customize the system according to their needs and preferences, rather than solely relying on computer scientists. So, thank you very much. I'll give now the floor to Professor Marco Gozzi, who will talk about an example of contrafactum in the Cortona laudario.
Thank you, Federico. In this contribution, I take a quick look at how the melody of a laude Altissima luce was modified to fit the text of Regina sovrana. Both Altissima luce and Regina sovrana have been handed down from the two oldest Italian laudari with notation: Cortona, Biblioteca del Comune dell'Accademia Etrusca 91, from the last decade of 13th century, and Florence, Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale, manuscript Banco Rari 18, from the early 14th century. On the slide, you see the beginning of the two Lauda texts, Ripresa and first stanza in Cortona version. Metrically, one can observe the identity of the two Riprese and the rhyme scheme, including the rhyme anza, consolanza, semblanza, and reposanza, leanza in Florence. But the last verse of the stanza in Regina Sovrana lacks the first 6 syllables. Here is bellezza formosa di Dio se semblanza, and here is only reserviam leanza. Also, from the point of view of the vocabulary, one can see the clear derivation of Regina Sovrana from the model col grande splendore in verse 1 of Altissima Luce is shifted to verse 3 of Regina Sovrana. The whole of verse 2 of the Ripresa is traced back to verse 2 of Altissima Luce. Stella Chiarita in verse 3 of Regina Sovrana is derived from Stella Marina in verse 4 of Altissima Luce, and so on. There is Regina, Regina. As far as the musical aspect is concerned, having as many as 4 attestations of a melody is a very rare case in the 13th century Lauda tradition. However, the transmission of the Altissima Luce melody, as well as that of its contrafactum Regina Sovrana, is very problematic and highlights many issues of this repertoire handed down mainly by oral transmission. Observe Altissima Luce in the Cortona laudario. The musical structure of the verse phrases is as follows: A, B, C, C, A, B. Let's see the transcription. This is how a transcription. The ripresa is A, B. Altissima luce col grande splendore, verse A. In voi dolce amore, aggian consolanza. B. Then the solist. Ave Regina pulzella amorosa, stella marina che non stai nascosa. C and C first. Luce divina, virtù graziosa. A again. Bellezza formosa di Dio se semblanza. B. So it is a very typical structure of ballata, which is found in 2 other laude of Cortona, O Maria Domelia and Laudar voglio per amore. It means that in each attestation of the lauda there are only 3 verse phrases, A, B, and C, and that I can compare 2 ways of writing the same sentence verse within the same lauda. In the Cortona laudario, the whole stanza is noted by mistake a third below. So the end is re, do, re, mi, re, but the right is fa, mi, fa, sol, fa. Okay, the clef is wrong. Impossible to end in protus on the note D and sing the reprise in tritus starting from F. It would also skip the almost obligatory musical rhyme between the end of a stanza and the end of a ripresa. The genesis of this error, frequent in the Cortona laudario and also in the Florence laudario, comes from the probable circulation of many laudes with notation in manuscripts with a musical staff made only of 2 lines, as in the Pisa Laudario now in Paris. The use of a 2-line staff forces the copies to often change the key or not to write down the key at all, which is of little importance in a context of prevalent oral tradition, and to mark the change of third with a simple line or some other sign. If whoever a scribe copies from a 2-line staff and does not know this sign, he is in the copying writes the melodic line a third below or above, making a mistake. The version handed down by the Florence Laudario corrects the key error in the stanza, although it shows several other minor errors. Here is fa, si, la, si, do, but the incipit of the second stanza, fa, re, si, la, si, do, it's correct. The 2 mutations begin correctly with IF, implementing the usual octave jump between ripresa and stanza. Remember that the stanza is reserved for the soloist and normally has a greater extension toward the high notes than the ripresa, which is intended for the assembly. There are some differences between Florence and Cortona, but there is also the error clef, C clef instead of F clef. Fa, 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 sol, altissima luce col grande splendore in Bancorari 18. However, if we compare the 2 drafts of the Cortona and Florence codices amended throughout philological conjecture, we obtain 2 versions that are very close to each other, which show a great similarity despite minor divergences, absolutely normal in a repertoire that lives essentially by oral tradition. In this Lauda, there is a memory trick which emerges more clearly in the version of the Florence Laudario. The last phrase verse of the ripresa and stanza, this one, the B, is identical apart from the first 2 syllables to the phrase verse of the mutazioni. Amore abbiam consolanza. Amore abbiam consolanza is the same. Se Regina pulcella amorosa with them and Marina che non stai nascosa. And in the Cortona Laudario, this is much less clear, but we shall see how it is also clear in the Contrafactum. So the musical structure of the verse phrases is as follow: A, B, B first, A, B. So the musical material is poor. But let's now see the Contrafactum Regina Sovrana. First of all, in the Cortona Laudario, while the ripresa coincides almost literally with the melodic version of Altissima Luce in the same Laudario, compare the transcriptions in the slide, Altissima Luce col grande splendore in voi dolce amore, aggian consolanza, and Regina, there is Regina sovrana de gran pietade, en te dolce madre, aggian reposanza. So here too the stanza have major problems. as we have seen happening in the model Altissima Luce, here too the whole stanza is written a third below. Fa, mi, do, re, do. The end is do, re, mi, re. The clef is fa, f clef, ut, re, mi, re, and fa, sol, la, sol, fa, mi, do, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, fa, the end of the ripresa. It has the wrong key and ends erroneously on D. But besides this one, there are other problems. The first mutation is written starting on the second note, a tone higher than the second mutation. Here is fa, re, si, do, re, and here is fa, mi, do, re, mi, and this error can only arise from the wrong reading of a custos. Having identified the errors, also with the help of the Florence lessons, a transcription is produced that allows us to assess the contrafactum. Stella chiarita col grande splendore. But here is the version of Regina Sovrana is full of errors in the Florence Laudario, starting with the text full with pleonastic eyes, stella splendore, gente smarrita. Okay, here is stella chiarita con grande splendore, gente smarrita, traiesti d'errore. Impossible hypermetrics, catte tutte l'ore, ti serrave leanza, and age reposanza, age, and is an incomprehensible word. The musical readings are a little better, apart from the usual unreliable rewriting in the upper part of folio 56, and the usual two notes on the same pitch in the presence of synalephisis. Some solutions can be observed that help the reconstruction of a musical structure of a lauda, despite the general sloppiness in the syllable notes correspondence. The beginning of the two mutazioni is at least very clear with correct K and correct intervals. F, D, B, pa, 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 fa, re, si, do, re, si, la, fa, mi, sol, fa. Okay. Gente, smar, fa, re, si. The results in the following transcription. The structure of the contrafactum is a little better than Cortona's solution, but still very weak. The misticchio Regi la vita, as a melody derived in part from the second part of the first verse of the ripresa, fa, mi, fa, sol, fa. This would be an excellent insight if the melodic borrowing had been derived from the second part of the first verse. The adaptation would have been much better, such as this. Regi la vita sica tutte l'ore, reserviam leanza. Let us now look at the model and the contrafactum from Florence. We can see that Regina Sovrana has, in contrast to the Cortona Laudario, an independent tradition. Finally, if we see the four melodic attestation or readings, two from Cortona and two from Florence, we can conclude that the contrafactum was done inaccurately and perhaps orally, so that the two versions of Regina Sovrana in Cortona and Florence are very close, differing only in the last verse of the first stanza, much shorter in Regina Sovrana, which creates the need to have the length of the model's verse phrase. In Cortona, the choice is to repeat the first musical hemistic, Regi la vita, or Regi la via, pa 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 pa, and Sica tutte l'ore, so creating an unmusical repetition, while the solution in Florence is a little more correct. Regi la vita, Sica tutte l'ore. Better still would have been to take the melody that in the ripresa pertains to grande pietade in this Regi la vita, and the contrafactum would have been far more successful. Thank you.